My name is Peg McLeish. I'm the Communications Director for the Marion County Prosecutor's Office, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the fourth and final Community Justice Academy session for 2018. Thanks so much for being with us, especially all of you who've been here all 4 weeks. We hope that you found it very engaging, educational, and hopefully we've exposed you to some new speakers you can stay in touch with in the future. Tonight, the topic is the need for sensible gun laws. We'll be touching on the realities of gun violence in Marion County. We have two very engaging speakers, and if any of you watched some of our technical difficulties earlier, it's because it's going to be a very interactive presentation with some photos and videos. A couple of housekeeping messages. If you could, since it is 6:07 and we know there are more people coming in, just if you are sitting and you could move in towards the middle or just kind of help flag empty chairs when people come in, we'd appreciate it because we know those seats are going to end up being filled. We're going to hold questions to the end of the presentation, please. As you know, refreshments are back in the corner. You're welcome to go out and grab refreshments or use restrooms at any time. Evaluation sheets, if you could, please fill those out and turn them in on your way out. We read each and every one. I can assure you we group together again at the beginning of the summer, usually after we've all had a chance to read through every one, and that's how we develop next year's curriculum. So we do take those to heart, and we appreciate your feedback. And finally, thanks to Channel 16, who is our government channel for Indianapolis. They've been with us each week. They've recorded every session. So if you did unfortunately miss one session or you have friends who wish they could have made it, they will be available online, and we'll send out those links to all of you via email so you can share them, rewatch, or like I said, share with someone else as well. One other housekeeping note, since it is the final session, we will have certificates and we will have t-shirts and some more fun at the end, including our traditional class photo, which we'll have to figure out how to fit all of us into it this year. It's grown. If you go back and look at some of the old photos, it's amazing. So if you would please hang with us and we'll do the group photo. We'll usually have to kind of move some chairs so we can all fit in, but it's definitely worth being in. So with that, I will introduce our speakers. Like I said, the topic is the need for sensible gun laws, and you should have had a postcard on your chair when you sat down. So this is your personal invitation to attend a art exhibit that is in multiple locations throughout the city right now. The exhibit is Stories of Gun Violence from Across America, and this one is specific to Indianapolis. The artist's name is Joe Quint. He's a photographer, and he took some pretty amazing photos of individuals who are part of our community who have been impacted by gun violence. And the idea is that not everyone who's in the photos necessarily was a victim themselves of gun violence or lost an immediate family member, but it's sort of that ripple effect of gun violence that isn't always discussed. So we were lucky enough to be approached, and we have one deputy prosecutor who handles a lot of murder cases, specifically gun violence murders, and so Ross Anderson is our deputy prosecutor who's featured in this photo exhibit. You can also go online. The ittakesUsindy.org website that's beneath the photo will take you to the photos just if you want to view them online, and they also have a quote or a message from the individual who's in the photograph that is very impactful. So some information if you want, I encourage you to go see that. So our two speakers tonight, we'd like to welcome Prosecutor Terry Curry back up to the podium to present tonight. Prosecutor Curry, as you know, is our boss, and he leads our office of nearly 400 staff, including 180 attorneys. The office prosecutes approximately 30,000 criminal cases each year. And one of the things that we don't talk about often enough, but is getting a lot of national attention right now, is that our office is a leader in smart justice, which is kind of the tagline that's being used right now. But essentially it's the idea of reducing recidivism, providing alternatives to incarceration for those with mental illness and addiction. And Prosecutor Curry has also been an advocate for what's called the second chance law in Indiana, which allows individuals who have old criminal records, I believe it's 8-10 years, depending on what the crime was, and it's also for a narrow number of crimes, but they are able to go back and have those expunged so that it does not prohibit them from employment opportunities and other opportunities in life. So It's not something that every single individual could do, and there is a time frame in which you must wait, but it is a very helpful thing for those who are ready to begin again and have fulfilled their sentence. So the other speaker who's new to us for the Community Justice Academy is Beth Sprunger. Beth is the state chapter lead for Moms Demand Action in Indiana. She's been with the organization for 4 years and held various roles through that time. She is a wife and the mother of 2 girls. Beth has spent countless hours at the State House, attending hearings, meeting with legislators, and organizing other members of the Moms Demand Action chapter to make their voices heard. So please welcome Beth when she joins us as well. I look forward to talking to you during the question period.
Good evening. Good evening. There is one additional staff member I wanted to introduce tonight. Our first evening here, virtually everyone who's here from our staff were introduced, but also tonight Rick Frank is here. Rick is in the back. He is a supervisor of our strike unit, and that unit is responsible for prosecution of guns, gangs, and drug cases, obviously bearing upon what we're going to talk about tonight. What we're going to do is, in the first instance, I'm going to talk about what gun violence looks like in Marion County, and more to the point, what the proliferation of lethal weapons looks like here in Indianapolis. And then Beth will come up and talk about her path to being involved in Moms Demand Action, as well as the goals that they hope to achieve, both in terms of public education and legislation. And then after Beth's presentation, I will come back up and talk about some federal legislation and what legislation looks like in terms of gun laws here in the state of Indiana. This is a AK-47 style firearm. The AK-47 actually was developed as far back as 1945 in Russia. The real AK-47 is a Russian-made weapon. There are AK-47 style weapons that are made here in Indiana, or I'm sorry, in the United States. In this particular one, you can see that the stock folds so that this weapon could be carried, see the pistol grip, and it could be carried as a pistol. For those of you who were here in the first week when we talked about capital punishment, we talked about that Major Davis had shot and killed Officer Perry Wren. This was the weapon that was being carried by Major Davis on July 5th of 2014. Officer Wren and another officer responded to that scene, and Perry Wren had been, Major Davis had been walking around a neighborhood cookout at 34th and Forest Manor on the east side of Indianapolis. He was carrying around like a pistol, like this, and when the officers arrived, there was a confrontation. Both the police officer who was there and civilian witnesses said that Major Davis was eventually holding this weapon behind his back, and as he began to raise the weapon, both officers and civilian witnesses said that the officers were screaming, "Don't do it, don't do it, don't do it," and Officer Wren was shot and killed. One thing that came in the aftermath of this was a number of conversations I had with members of the public, and even attending a meeting at St. Luke's Methodist Church up on the north side of Indianapolis, where literally a participant there was yelling at me, "Why is it possible to be walking around in a neighborhood cookout carrying this weapon?" And this AK-47 had been purchased legitimately by Major Davis's mother. And Major Davis's criminal history was that he only had a prior misdemeanor conviction. So under Indiana law, there was absolutely nothing that prevented Major Davis from walking around a neighborhood cookout carrying this weapon. Let me say it again. Under Indiana law, there was nothing that prevented Major Davis from walking around with this weapon at 34th and Forest Manor here in Indianapolis. In Indiana, there's essentially only two provisions that would relate to the purchase of a firearm and then the possession of a firearm. And that is, in the first instance, in order to buy a firearm through a federally licensed dealer, there would be a background check done through what's called the NICS system, National Instant Criminal Background Check System. It is a national database that federally licensed gun dealers are required to submit a background check and then determine whether there was anything that disqualified, say, Terry Curry from purchasing a firearm. In addition, in order to carry a handgun in the state of Indiana, you're required to obtain a permit. And you do not have to have a permit to possess a firearm on your own property, in your vehicle, on a property in which you have permission to have a handgun. Otherwise, you're required to have a permit. There's an application process and a small fee in order to obtain a handgun permit. Otherwise, those are essentially the only two requirements in the state of Indiana that relate to either the purchase or possession of a firearm. The AK-47, you would not have to have a permit to carry that weapon. In Indiana, in terms of gun crimes, there are essentially three crimes that can be charged for possession of a firearm. And these three crimes are in addition to, obviously, there are crimes that are more serious if it were committed with a firearm. So that if robbery were committed with a deadly weapon, it would be a more serious offense than a robbery without. Likewise, a sexual offense with a deadly weapon would be more serious. But these three crimes are basically what we call standalone gun crimes. The first is carrying a handgun without a license. As I said, it's necessary to obtain a permit if you're going to carry a handgun in public. Unlike some states, there is no distinction made between concealed carry or open carry. You merely are required to have a permit to carry the handgun without regard to whether it's concealed or carried openly. A violation of that offense is a Class A misdemeanor. Obviously we have it up there. A second offense for carrying a handgun without a license, if you've been convicted of the misdemeanor offense and you're arrested again and convicted, that is a level 5 felony. And lastly, the most serious gun crime, standalone gun crime in Indiana, is possession of a firearm by a serious violent felon. In other words, if you have a prior conviction for a robbery, a sex offense, serious sex offense, and you are then caught with a firearm again and convicted, we call it SVF, as a level 4 felony. Anyone want to venture a guess how many of these combined offenses we filed in Indianapolis, Marion County in 2017?
20,000.
How many?
20,000.
20,000 is a little high. We only resolved 30,000 total criminal offenses. So 2,000? Yeah, closer. 1,800. We filed 1,800 of these offenses in 2017. We resolved about 1,700 in 2017. And it breaks down about a third among those. I think it's slightly under 600 SVFs were filed last year. But if you think about that, obviously that's almost 2 per day. And in the course of the last year, that we charged individuals who had a serious prior criminal conviction who were caught again with a firearm. Next slide has how many pending, as of today, how many pending homicide cases we have in our office. These are cases that are already filed, and obviously you can see the breakdown. 147 pending murder cases, 2 voluntary manslaughter, 3 involuntary manslaughter, 6 reckless homicide, and of those total, 78% of them involve use of a firearm. So I'm going to go through a series of slides. I'm not going to dwell on them too much, but just some representations of the sort of things that we could show hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of photos that depict the sort of firearms that are in Indianapolis today. This first slide shows a number of individuals, and I don't know how well you can see it, but what they are doing there, and I will try and point it out. This individual here, 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 all of them are holding their handguns in such a way to display the fact that they have extended magazines, which obviously hold a number of rounds as compared to a standard magazine. This young man on your left was 17 years old. In his left hand, he's holding a semi-automatic handgun. In his right hand, he's holding a Tech 9, which is also a semi-automatic handgun. And we're going to talk about this throughout the presentation. And most of you probably know when we talk about a semi-automatic or an automatic weapon. A semi-automatic weapon means that you can fire that weapon as fast as you can pull the trigger. An automatic weapon will fire continuously as long as you hold the trigger. If any of you have been in the military, I was in the Army, and M16 is capable of being fired either semi-automatic or automatic. But if you put it on automatic, it'll literally be and it'll fire as long as you hold your finger on the trigger. All of these weapons, which we're going to talk about here, show here, are semi-automatic weapons. Automatic weapons, as we will get to, are illegal in the United States. Next 3 slides are ones that we saw, for those of you here, the first week. This individual's named Jonathan Cruz. He was convicted of 3 murders in the course of 4 days. As you recall from our discussion that first week, he was acting out a movie called The Purge, where individuals were, it was based on the movie in which the theme was that for 24 hours each year, individuals could commit crimes without being prosecuted. And he talked about the fact that he was purging at that time. If you recall, 187 was a reference to the Criminal Code of California, the statutory provision regarding murder. What Jonathan Cruz is holding is in his left hand is a revolver, and his right hand is a semi-automatic handgun. In the 3 murders that were committed by Jonathan Cruz, 2 of them were committed with a revolver, and the 3rd was committed with a semi-automatic handgun. Again, these are slides we saw the first week. Here he is holding a revolver. And in this one, Jonathan Cruz is in the front holding a revolver. The individual next to him there, who has since actually been convicted of crimes related to participating in robberies with Jonathan Cruz, named Elijah Brooks, and he is holding a semi-automatic handgun. We'll look at a series of pictures here, which are primarily from drug arrests, which occurred here in Indianapolis, and the seizure of not only drugs and cash, but also firearms. In this particular one, the handgun in the middle is a Glock. That is a typical semi-automatic handgun. Our law enforcement officers carry Glock handguns. The one to the side is a high-point handgun, likewise a semi-automatic handgun, and the rifle is, again, an AK-style semi-automatic rifle, just like the first slide that we saw. Another typical firearm that was seized in a drug raid. This is a Soviet-style rifle, and it is a self-loading, just like most of the semi-automatics. Interestingly, on this one, if you can see there, I'll point it out along here, is actually a bayonet that would click out. Again, a similar sort of rifle. This was actually probably another AK style weapon seized in a drug raid. This is a Taurus semi-automatic handgun with obviously extended, and extended magazines are also referred to as high capacity magazine. This magazine likely would hold 25 rounds. This AR-15 semi-automatic rifle, sort of styled after the M16, which is a military rifle I referred to earlier. The AR is very similar, semi-automatic, and we are constantly seeing these in arrest and in the commission of crimes here in Indianapolis. This one can't see as well, but again, this is just another AR-15 from another drug arrest.
Is that a silencer on the tip, or is it?
No, it is not. This is a MAC-10, pretty similar to the Tech-9 that we looked at earlier. Again, a relatively high capacity magazine and semi-automatic as well. This one obviously has a combination of weapons in here. The rifle is an AR-15. The handguns are semi-automatic handguns. You can see there's 3 of them in this picture, as well as a fair amount of cash. And interestingly, it's not easy to see, so I'm going to point it out again. Up here, underneath the AR, is where you can see the wooden handle there. There's an AK-style pistol, handgun. And the large round item below is a drum magazine. That would hold at least 60 rounds of ammunition. This is a Kel-Tec Sub 2000, again, a semi-automatic rifle. One advantage of that to individuals who want to have these sort of weapons is that it's actually, the magazine is compatible with a Glock handgun. So if you had a Glock handgun, you could use the same magazines for both the handgun and this particular rifle. Again, I'm not exaggerating when I say that we could show you hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pictures off Facebook, pictures from arrests made here in Indianapolis with these lethal weapons over and over and over. So I'm going to step aside for Beth, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit about legislation.
Hi, thank you. That's tough to follow. I've not seen so many photos like that all put together into one. It's really overwhelming to think about. So I'm here. I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about what our organization is and what we do and how I got involved. So just a little bit to start. So Moms Demand Action was started by a woman named Shannon Watts. She lived up on the north side of Indy in Zionsville. And shortly after the Sandy Hook shooting that happened about a little over 5 years ago, where 20 first graders were killed in their classroom, she decided that enough was enough and that something had to be done about the gun problem in the United States. And so she started a Facebook page, which quickly grew and grew and grew. It started out as, I think the original name of the group was 1 Million Moms for Gun Control. And she quickly realized that 1 million was not a high enough number. So currently right now, after about 5 years, we are at over 5 million supporters across the country with our organization. We have chapters in every state around the country, and we're very active on the state level and on the federal level with legislation. We also are involved in several other aspects of the gun violence issue other than just legislation. So I actually got involved about a little over 4 years ago when my oldest daughter, so this is an old picture from, this was my very first event that I went to. I took the girls with me. I was a little bit nervous. My husband was a little bit nervous because we weren't quite sure what to expect and what happens at these. But thankfully we've never here in Indiana had much issues with our events, and we have large crowds and great events and activities and meetings, and we have not met a lot of opposition to those, thankfully. But this event particularly was at a Kroger. We were talking to them about trying to fix their policy of allowing guns in the stores. So that's one aspect of things that we do, trying to change the culture around guns in our country, and trying to talk to retailers and to stores and to get them to understand that people don't want to shop for groceries with walking around with people with guns on their belts. And so we've had a lot of success with different organizations around the country that have changed their gun policies. So I was, my daughter, Corrigan, who was just about to enter kindergarten at the time, I walked into her kindergarten orientation, and I just got this overwhelming sense of she's leaving me for the first time. And that thought of those children at Sandy Hook came into my head. And I thought, there's gotta be something that I can do. And I quickly, right around that same time, found out about Moms and decided that was the organization that I needed to be a part of. And so that's why I joined initially, was for my children. And quickly after that, I realized that it's not just my children that I need to save, but it's all the children around the country and everyone else's children. And specifically this woman here, Deandra Yates, you might have seen her, she's been on the news a lot here in Indianapolis. Her son, Dre, was shot at a birthday party when he was 13 years old. And she's become a very good friend of mine over the last 4 years. And it's for her and other survivors like her that keep us here doing what we do day after day and week after week, trying to solve this problem so that a 13-year-old boy who's at a birthday party doesn't have to be in fear of a stray bullet flying through the window and shooting him in the head. He's now a nonverbal quadriplegic. He has been for 4 years now, and so her life is obviously forever changed, along with all the rest of her family members. And so I work with her, and I work with other survivors here in the Indianapolis area and across the country. So obviously there are a lot of survivors in the country because, as you can see from this statistic, Americans are 25 times more likely to be shot with a gun than any other developed country in the world. So it's obviously a uniquely American problem that we have here with guns. And other countries have figured out a way to solve it, so it seems like we should be able to also. So some of the motivations and the goals we have with Moms, we obviously work on the legislative level, trying to change laws and elect leaders who will pass common sense laws, and I'll get to that a little bit later. And then we also have a program called Be Smart, which is a child access prevention program, and I'll talk a little bit about that too. And then we also have a survivor engagement program, which is also part of our organization, and that involves, Deandra actually runs that for the state of Indiana. And so across the country, we have survivors that we work with on all of our events and everything that we do. We try to keep them the center of our organization or our motivation of why we're doing what we do, to keep people out of that position that they're in. So Be Smart is our child access prevention program. It also can relate to adults who may not be of sound body and mind being able to have a weapon with them. So keep in mind when I'm talking about some of these things of what Be Smart principles are, that they apply to both children in the home, but also if there is an adult who you think could be a danger to themselves or to others, this would absolutely apply to them too. So some of the things that we do with Be Smart is we will go out into the community and give presentations. We'll go into schools. We've done a lot of work with the Head Start program here in Indianapolis, talking to parents of preschoolers and young children who are in that program. We also do a lot of tabling events where we'll go to local community events and talk to them about Be Smart and what it is. And we also hand out free gun locks to people to try to encourage safe storage of guns in the home. I don't know if you guys have been a part of any of the National Night Out events, but we did, I think, 8 of those events just in Indianapolis this past spring when they had them. And those are great opportunities for people in the community to come out and come together and learn about ways to keep their communities safer. We also go into schools, especially after the Noblesville shooting last year. We've had a lot of people reach out to us asking us to come into their PTOs, to share this information, to give presentations, to talk about how these principles can help keep guns out of the hands of these kids who are taking them into schools and carrying them around on the streets here in Indianapolis. It's all of those guns that these kids have came from an adult at some point. They were all purchased by an adult, and at some point, an adult failed them and let these guns get into their hands. So that's kind of the overarching part of what Be Smart is. So the SMART is an acronym, and this is what it talks about. And so S is to secure guns in homes and vehicles. So anytime you have a firearm that you have purchased, we just encourage everyone to make sure that it is locked, unloaded, and the ammunition stored separately in their home. Model responsible gun behavior, meaning you always treat a weapon as if it's loaded. You never point a weapon at someone. You don't use a gun in any manner that could make it look like it's a toy or a game or any sort of irresponsible behavior in that way that would model that to children. Asking about unsecured guns in the home. While you might be a responsible gun owner and keep your gun locked up, your children may be going into other people's homes, and it's a really important conversation to have. And the more we have it, the more we normalize that conversation, and the more people understand how important it is to keep guns locked up. And we're not against gun ownership. We understand that the Second Amendment exists for a reason, and people have the right and the ability to keep firearms in their homes to protect themselves, and that's fine, but with that right comes the responsibility that you need to keep those guns secure. So I've had several conversations now with other parents when my children go over to their house to play, and it's awkward at first and it's a little bit hard, but once you do it a few times, it gets easier, and the more you have it, the more other people will have it, and I feel like I've opened up a lot of other parents' eyes to the need for that conversation. And so normalizing that behavior is another goal of this. The R stands for recognizing the risk of teen suicides. And that also, like I said, can be extrapolated out to adults too, who you think might be a danger to themselves or to others. Here in Indiana, we're in the top 5 states of teen suicide. So we have a huge issue with that here. And keeping guns away from those kids, because guns are the most lethal method of suicide by huge percentage-wise. And so to keep those guns out of their hands very much greatly reduces the chance that even if they do try to commit suicide, that they will actually commit that and complete the act. Other means are much less fatal. And then the T is for tell your peers. And so, while you might be practicing these principles, if you don't share it with everyone that you know, again, it helps to normalize the conversation and get that information out there to others. So that's our Be Smart campaign. I think it's really important. Like I said, all of these young people walking around the streets got these guns from somewhere. And if we could all keep our guns locked up, so, a lot of these are probably stolen guns, keeping them locked up in the home when you have taken the responsibility upon yourself to buy them is very important. And then lastly, I just want to talk a little bit about our legislative work that we do here in Indiana, and then on the federal level too. So we go down into the State House quite a lot in Indiana. Our legislative session starts in January. And some years it's a short session and it goes till March. Some years it goes a few months longer than that. But some states have legislative sessions that go year round. Here in Indiana, ours is a shorter one. So we really hit it hard for those 4 or 5 months that they have the legislative session going. And we go into the State House. We have one day out of the year that we call Lobby Day, where we bring in hundreds of people from all across the state to meet with their legislators, and to show how important this issue is to our state and how important it is that we pass common sense gun legislation here in Indiana. We also show up at hearings. This photo here is a group of moms who came to a hearing last summer. They did a special session to discuss the idea of removing our permitting system altogether here in Indiana. And thankfully that was opposed pretty strongly at that meeting by most of the people who spoke. But we had, 25 to 50 people show up at every single one of those hearings, and we filled the hearing room. And our red shirts are something that all the legislators have come to recognize, and they know we're gonna be at the State House every year, and they're willing to talk to us, and so we meet with them on an individual basis too. And one thing that we really want to be is we want to be a resource to them. We don't want to be a hindrance, we don't want to be annoying. We want to be there for them to teach them about what common sense gun laws can do for us and how they can improve our state. So we go around and talk to them. We provide data-driven research about how Hoosiers feel about gun laws, and overwhelmingly, both Republicans and Democrats support universal background checks and permitting systems and all of those common sense rules that are applied to guns around the country. And so hopefully them learning about those things can help them make educated decisions on the laws that they should make here. In addition to that, we work on federal campaigns. We work with our senators and our House reps here, talking to them about how they should vote based on how Hoosiers feel about gun laws too. And then, especially during election years, now we are working with candidates who are running for office. And for the first time ever this year, we have a distinction called the Gun Sense Candidate that candidates can apply for. And if they are willing to support common sense gun legislation, then they get the Moms Demand Action distinction of a Gun Sense candidate. And we will go out and we will canvass for them and phone bank for them and really push to try to get them elected to help pass those laws that need to be passed so badly, both on the state and the federal level. So that's kind of a little overview of who we are and what we do. If you have any interest in learning more about it or joining our database of people to learn more about what our meetings are and come to Lobby Day with us this year and meet your legislator if you haven't already, you can text the word JOIN to 64433 and that'll get you into our system. There's also some postcards out front that have our information on them too. So, thank you.
Last November, Ryan Mears, who you've met in earlier sessions, is our chief trial deputy. Last November, Ryan and I went to DC for a 2-day gathering of Prosecutors Against Gun Violence. Prosecutors Against Gun Violence is an association of large city prosecutors and district attorneys advocating for common sense solutions to gun violence and for sensible gun regulation. At that conference, what we discussed was pending federal legislation, both bills that we as an organization opposed and the bills that we supported. But this gathering took place about a month and a half after the mass shooting in Las Vegas. And the district attorney from Las Vegas brought with him a video, which we viewed, of a body cam of a female Las Vegas officer running into the crowd during that shooting. Stephen Paddock fired over 1,000 rounds in 10 minutes' time. As it turned out, what he had were AR-15 semi-automatic rifles that were outfitted with bump stocks. Bump stocks are a device that essentially utilizes the recoil to allow you to pull the trigger over and over and over much more than you would just manually otherwise. Going back to our trip to DC, there were a number of federal bills that we as the Prosecutors Against Gun Violence supported, and part of what we were doing while we were there was lobbying members of Congress regarding the bills that we supported and the bills that we opposed. I'm going to talk a little bit about each of those. But almost immediately after the Las Vegas mass shooting, bills were introduced in both the Senate and the House called Automatic Gunfire Prevention Act, which would have banned the sale of bump stocks. As I said, those were introduced almost immediately after the shooting, which occurred in October of last year. The Senate bill had a hearing in the Senate Judiciary Committee in March 2018, but no vote was taken in the committee, and the House bill was introduced and no further action has been taken. The main federal law that regulates and prohibits the sale of automatic weapons is the National Firearms Act, which actually dates back to 1934. And under the National Firearms Act, you can actually purchase a machine gun that was manufactured prior to 1986. Now, it is a very comprehensive process, and there is background checks, significant fees involved, and so it is not a simple thing to go out and buy a machine gun. If it's been manufactured after 1986, there's an absolute prohibition against it. But there are ways that you could purchase one prior to 1986. So in the last week, we went online and just looked up sale of bump stocks. This one actually shows it's in Carmel, but in reality, these are online sites that tie into locations around the country to attract purchasers in that area. This one doesn't have it on there, but this was a used bump stock that was for sale for $99. What's even more interesting is the description that went along with it. It says, if you can't see it from the back, for sale, used slide fire stock. This stock can be attached to any military spec AR-15 for legal full auto type fire, without paperwork, weight, or costly transferable machine guns. This stock does not convert your AR-15 to fire fully automatically, but allows the user to use the recoil of the rifle and a forward pressure on the upper to pull the trigger rapidly. One of the things that's most sobering, of course, about the video we saw, and there's a video that the body cam that Ryan and I saw in D.C., is the sound of the fire and the rapidity of that fire. Anyone here in the military, fire automatic weapons, M16? Anyone? Yeah. I did as well. Did it sound just like automatic fire? He's nodding yes. But you can get around all that costly paperwork by buying this used bump stock. Another one we found actually cites a location in Nevada, ironically. And again, it's a bump stock for sale for $200. Here's the description that goes along with it. A few 3D printed bump stocks for sale, $200 each. I'll not read through all of it, but at the bottom, just horribly ironic. It says, I can meet in Carson City or Reno possibly, in Nevada. Same place where Stephen Paddock killed 58 people with a bump stock. So, as I said, our organization supported the ban on bump stocks, which has gone nowhere in the last several months, almost a year's time. Other bills that we supported is the Background Check Completion Act. Under federal law, for a federally licensed gun dealer, you're required to submit the background check, But if you as the dealer do not have a response within 3 days, you can go ahead and sell that firearm to the individual. So the Background Check Completion Act basically said you can't, as a dealer, sell the weapon until you have a response from NICS on the background check. The bill is also referred to as the Charleston Loophole, and what that refers to is the murder of 8 parishioners and the pastor at Emmanuel AME Charleston Church by Dylan Roof, which occurred in June of 2015. He was the white supremacist who killed the 9 individuals at the church with a weapon that he had purchased, and he would have been prevented from purchasing that weapon if the 3-day time limit did not apply. In other words, he was able to purchase the weapon because the NICS system had not responded within the 3-day time period. That bill likewise has gone nowhere. It was heard in the Senate Judiciary Committee in March 2018 with no vote taken, and the corresponding bill in the House has not even received a committee hearing. We also supported as an organization various bills. There were several bills related to domestic violence and the need to remove weapons from individuals who have been accused or convicted of domestic violence, stalking, and similar offenses. Lori Jackson Domestic Violence Survivor Protection Act, Protecting Domestic Violence and Stalking Victims Act, that was called the Closing the Boyfriend Loophole. Those bills have gone nowhere in our Congress. In addition, as I said, there were federal bills that were pending at the time we were there that we as an organization opposed. The first on here is called the Constitutional Concealed Carry Reciprocity Act. Under that bill, if you can legally carry a handgun in your own state, you can carry that handgun anywhere. There are 14 states in the country that do not require any sort of permit at all. So under this bill, if you carried a handgun in Arkansas or Vermont or other states that did not require any sort of permit, you could take that handgun anywhere in the U.S., including Times Square in New York City, where they have very stringent requirements regarding the ability to carry a handgun. That bill was opposed by our organization, and every major police organization in the entire country opposed the bill. About a week after we were in D.C., that bill passed by a significant margin in the House of Representatives. It has moved on to the Senate, where it remains pending in our U.S. Senate. Another bill that we opposed is called the Sportsmen's Heritage and Recreational Enhancement Act. The SHARE Act is what it's called. On the face of it, by the description, it sounds like hunting and fishing, but among the provisions in that bill, it would deregulate the sale of silencers. Just like machine guns now, there are very stringent requirements before you can purchase a silencer. It is widely believed that silencers are not used much in crimes because they are so heavily regulated. In order to purchase one, again, you go through the background check, you have your photo taken, you're fingerprinted, and so obviously if you had legitimately purchased that, passing it on to someone who uses it in a crime, it's going to be easily traced back to you. And silencers are not frequently used in crimes in the United States. This bill would deregulate the sale of silencers, so you could go buy one over the counter at Don's Guns if you wanted. The bill would also eliminate the ability of the ATF, which is Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, federal agency, to regulate a number of things. It would eliminate the ability of ATF to label certain ammunition as armor-piercing ammunition. It would eliminate the ability of the ATF to prevent importation of dangerous firearms from outside the U.S. that are not suitable for sporting purposes. That bill has not passed either house, but remains pending. The third one we have listed there is called the Veterans Second Amendment Rights Protection Act. Under existing law, veterans who are determined by the VA to be mentally incompetent and mentally disabled, there's a procedure by which the VA can make that determination. The veteran has the ability to appeal it and to appeal that decision, and it goes through 2 levels of appeal before that determination is final. But if that determination is final, the VA is currently required to submit that information to the NICS system so that there is an alert that this individual should not be able to purchase a firearm. By the Veterans Second Amendment Rights Protection Act, the VA would not be allowed to submit that information to NICS and would make it easier for veterans who are perhaps a threat to themselves and to others. It would make it easier for them to purchase a firearm. Why is that important? VA estimates that 20 veterans a day commit suicide in the United States, virtually all of them by firearms. And I posed the question, as I have on more than one occasion, that as we learn more about this legislation, the question to me is this debate about the Second Amendment, or is it about the ability of the gun industry to sell stuff? And I don't think there's any question that the debate is about selling stuff. The ability to sell silencers over the counter, the ability to sell bump stocks, to sell weapons, to be able to import weapons from outside the country. To me, that is the core of the issue as we just talk about this legislation. Gabby Giffords, you might recall, was a congresswoman from Arizona who in 2011 was attending a constituent meeting in a parking lot and a gunman opened fire. 6 individuals were killed that day. Gabby Giffords was horribly wounded and is disabled as a result of her wounds. And after it occurred, like many organizations, she formed an organization to advocate for sensible gun laws. And it is called the Giffords Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence. On their site, they evaluate all the state laws regarding gun regulation. And as you can see, there are states that earn an A rating based upon the Giffords Law Center, 4 that have B, and Indiana is rated as D- by the Law Center. As Beth has said, Moms Demand Action and other organizations advocate for what many believe to be sensible gun regulations, we've spent the last several sessions fighting attempts to roll back what limited provisions we have regarding the sale and purchase of gun weapons or firearms, and including, as Beth said in the last session, one bill that was introduced would eliminate even the permit requirement for handguns. I testified at the summer study committee that Beth referred to, and she was actually being modest in her description. There were so many people there that the hearing was moved from a committee hearing room to the entire chambers. And when I testified, at least, 95% of the folks in that chamber were women in red T-shirts. And as Beth said, fortunately, we were able to beat back that bill. But many of us believe that it's time that we stop just opposing the sort of bills that would roll back regulation and advocate for affirmative legislation to involve sensible regulation of the sale, purchase, and possession of firearms. And again, these are up here, which would be, as Beth said, universal background checks for any firearms purchases. As I said at the outset, the only time in Indiana that a background check is required is sale through a federally licensed firearms dealer. This refers, you probably have heard the gun show loophole. So that if you're deemed to be a private dealer at a gun show, you can sell a firearm without submitting the background check. Carry permit required for all firearm types. As I said, you have to have a permit to carry a handgun, but if you carry an AR-15 around the streets of Indianapolis, you're not required to have a permit. When there was demonstration in the Capitol building, not long after the shooting at the school in Florida, there were individuals walking around our Capitol carrying AR-15s as a counter-protest to the rally that was going on inside the Capitol. Third is obvious, that is the ability to ban bump stocks and high-capacity magazines, which are banned in several states. Safe storage is an issue that Beth has referred to. And lastly, under current Indiana law, any municipality in the state of Indiana is not allowed to, by ordinance or otherwise, regulate the possession of firearms within the limits of the municipality. So if we as a community in Indianapolis thought that it was inappropriate to carry an AR in Eagle Creek Park, we could not do that. We could not disallow that. We could not do an ordinance because the legislature's determined that the municipalities are not allowed to do that. And so we feel it's appropriate that the legislature consider a repeal of that preemption act so that we as a community, and whether it's Fort Wayne or Indianapolis or wherever, that we can determine where it's appropriate that individuals have firearms within our city. One last thing, and we've talked about negative things. One positive thing is that Indiana is unique and progressive in that we have a red flag law. It is called the Jake Laird Law. And what it does is that it allows the police, in a circumstance where they determine that an individual is an immediate threat to themselves or to others, that the police have the ability to seize that weapon at the time. This arises a lot in threatened suicide situations, in domestic violence situations, and the police have the ability to seize that weapon. Then it falls to us as the prosecutor's office to file a petition with the court to allow the court to determine whether in fact that individual is a threat to themselves and a threat to others. In 2017, we had 49 situations where guns were seized and not returned to the individual who had it in the first instance. We are only one of 5 states in the country that have a red flag law, and other states in the federal government are considering something similar.
So you would have to ask that specifically then, like if you call 911 and said,
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, I have a question. For that-
Yeah, we're ready for questions.
For the Laird law, you would have to tell them, like 911, that you're worried about, you have to mention it, right?
That's typically how it arises, yes. Is there is a 911 call and says, my son's threatening suicide or in a domestic violence situation, and if the officers determine that person makes a judgment that person is an immediate threat to themselves or to others, they have the ability to seize that weapon. And the reason it's called the Jake Laird Law is that years ago there was a circumstance where an individual had a semi-automatic rifle. He was acting irrationally. The police took that rifle from him. May have been actually more than one weapon, I don't recall, but at least one semi-automatic rifle. And the individual whose weapon was taken from him then showed up at the police department a few days later and said, I want my AR back, and the police had no ability to not return it. And then a few days later, that individual was acting irrationally again. There was a confrontation, and Jake Laird was shot and killed by that individual.
Oh, it was just someone that I knew had committed suicide, we didn't know we did a welfare check on her, and the police checked her out, made sure she was okay, and she had committed suicide that night. So it was like, we wish we would have known that, hey, he's got a gun on her. make sure she take away that gun.
No, that is obviously the purpose.
Yeah, you know, thank you.
Yep. You gonna handle the question? Okay. All right. Beth? This question will be from Beth as well. So start ahead.
On the incident where the man sat down on the couch at IKEA, gun fell out of his pocket, kids came later, and, oh, hi. Hi. Question is about the incident where the gentleman was shopping at IKEA, had a gun in his pocket, sat on the sofa, thought I didn't know it fell out, children got it, and shot the gun in the store. He's being prosecuted for not being careful with that gun. Why is that not done more often, that when guns are used in crimes, that the owners or the purchasers that have legal guns are not prosecuted in some way or held responsible?
Right, and that individual is being prosecuted in Hamilton County, and he's charged with criminal recklessness, I believe, is what he's charged with. First of all, if there is a crime, that if we can determine that an individual had purchased a firearm to give to someone to commit a crime, then we could prosecute the purchaser. We could do that. That's kind of difficult to prove that that was the purpose of the individual in the first instance, but we can do that. Now, what we have done, and in horribly tragic situations, is where individuals, particularly a parent or someone in a guardian type situation, has left a weapon in a purse, on the counter, and one child has then shot and killed another child. You know, those situations we have filed neglect. So you know, your point is, yeah, if we could trace it, or if it's what's called a straw purchase, you know, where the individual purchases the weapon legitimately because they can do so, and then it ends up in someone else's hands. You know, if it can be proved that was the intent in the straw purchase, then they can be prosecuted, and actually they can be prosecuted under federal law as well as under state law.
Excuse me, my follow-up to that is not that they intentionally allowed someone to have the gun to do something illegal with it. It's to encourage gun owners to know that if they don't keep their guns safe, locked up, or if it's stolen and it's not reported and used in a crime, in some way, they're going to be responsible, whether that's a ticket, whether that's you know, some kind of recourse for not keeping that gun safe.
Right. In order to be convicted of crime, any crime, there has to be a criminal intent. So if that happened innocently, that gun was used, then in terms of a crime, there's nothing that we could do, because we have to prove the criminal intent, that the person did so intentionally or knowingly. That's the law. Otherwise, you know, is there the ability for someone to be subjected to a civil suit, for example? Yes, but in order to prove a crime, you know, whether it's the scenario you pointed or anything else, we have to show the criminal intent involved.
So it's not a crime to be careless with your gun?
No, it is potentially a criminal reckless, just like the man at IKEA.
Right.
And so that's criminal recklessness.
Okay.
But we have to be able to show that it was reckless,
Okay.
you know, to do so. In that situation, letting it fall out in a big box store, that was considered to be reckless. Let's just kind of work our way around. You, sir. Yes, sir.
I have a question for Beth, if I may. The question is, you used the phrase, I think it was a gun problem, and then you talked about a solution to the gun problem. Could you be more specific as to what you see as the gun problem? And I don't mean that as a joke, but what is the problem as you see it? And then what is your version of the solution look like? Thank you.
Sure, well, I guess the problem is that we have more gun violence than any other developed nation in the world. And the solution that we see is passing legislation that helps control the proliferation of guns around the country, such as all of these laws that he mentioned earlier, like universal background checks, and making sure that things like bump stocks and silencers and all of those accessories that make it easier to commit crimes with guns and to kill other people with guns, that those accessories stay maintained the way that they are, that you can't get them so easily. Universal background checks is really one of the biggest ones. Currently, like the prosecutor was mentioning, states like Indiana and many others around the country, I think we only have about 14 states in the US that have fully universal background checks where every gun sale you have to pass a background check. Other states like Indiana, you can go to gun shows, or you can, tons of guns are sold through online purchases or private sale, person to person. So getting rid of those loopholes and creating universal background checks could really cut down on the gun violence. Those 14 states that do have universal background checks have much lower rates of gun violence and domestic violence situations, police officers being shot with guns, and several other instances too. So that's one very specific law that could be passed on the federal level that could really mitigate the gun violence in the country.
If I could add something to that as well, is that, clearly, in Indiana and the entire country, the toothpaste is out of the tube in many respects. The sort of firearms that we see here are out there, but in my mind, that doesn't mean that we keep doing what we're doing. That we take sensible steps to regulate the sale and possession of firearms. Yes, ma'am.
First of all, Beth, I'd like to say thank you for all the work that your group is doing. You are making a difference. And also, Mr. Curry, do you know that there's going to be a gun buyback by the concerned clergy in about, the first Saturday in November? Have you heard about the?
I didn't know it was going forward. They had talked to, I had heard from Chief Roach that there was discussions to that effect.
Well, it's official. The first Saturday in November, we're going to be at a church over on the Olivet Church. Thank you. You know more about it? I just know that it's at Olivet Church, and then they're also going to have one at MLK Center later in the month. So the community Saturday, that same Saturday. Thank you, Carlene. There are things that are being done in the community to try to affect what's going on with guns. And we appreciate your standing up, Mr. Curry, to do what you can do from your end. Thank you.
Thank you. So no, I had not heard anything further from Chief Roach. Chief Roach had mentioned that to me at some point.
They paying pretty good, it's pretty good money. I think it starts at 85 and go up.
Yes, there will be a screening process. Yes, sir.
Would it be a fair statement to say that all of the legislation that you talked about, either being for or against, the NRA would take the opposite position?
Yes.
Which it has a right to do.
When you have those posts where you see the people are selling the bump things and all of that stuff that's now illegal, are there like maybe teams or some kind of undercover setup where they can eliminate that, or?
Yeah, no, bump stocks are legal. You can purchase them. Now, there's a handful of states that have banned them, but otherwise, it is not illegal, for example, in Indiana, to sell bump stocks. They are currently legal. And the bill was introduced almost immediately after the shooting in Las Vegas, and federal Congress put that bill as just sat there, has not been passed.
Okay, so the second part of that question is with the bills, because you named 2 bills that are just staying stagnant. Is there a push for those bills to be passed? Like who would, with the amount of, with the statistics that were listed on the screen, who would be able to give a push looking at those statistics and just be like, hey, we need to do something or take some sort of action?
The public, you know, and obviously Moms Demand Action, when we were in DC, that was exactly the point, is we spanned out across DC and talked to various legislators, and obviously our voice has not carried the day yet, but
Thank you.
yeah. All right, well, we're gonna work our way over here in a second. Go ahead. Yes, sir.
You mentioned earlier that about the case where somebody was carrying around an AK-style weapon around a cookout or something, and it was their right to do that. I've seen YouTube videos where people seem to want to boast about and challenge police for the right to open carry long weapons. So I'm just curious, if I don't recall ever hearing about that happening in Indianapolis, but do you know if somebody in Indianapolis were to try something like that, it's done? Is it okay to call 911 and report that, and would police respond in that case?
Yes, I mean, you can call, but it is not illegal to do that. That is the point. If I had an AK, I could have carried it in here tonight. There's nothing to prevent that. I didn't talk about it. I didn't mention it because it's a pending case, and I can't go into detail. But where the 1-year-old was shot and killed when 2 individuals shot into the house, it's the same scenario. AR-15s, and there was nothing illegal about those 2 individuals who were charged with the crime from having an AR-15. And so, yeah, you can openly carry. As I mentioned, the March for Our Lives rally that occurred down at the Capitol, there were individuals walking around the Capitol with AR-15 slung over their shoulder. Yeah, Pat.
Yes, It seems to be almost an impossibility, from what I'm sitting here listening, to get rid of the guns as we would like to do, like overnight. Is there anything in the Constitution saying that the person has a right, who owns the guns, to have the ammunition? What if we take the ammunition away? Stop letting them have it. Wouldn't they, soon after they use up what they've got on stock, become disinterested in the gun if they can't buy the weapon,
So just
the
pose.
guns,
Just pose.
get rid of the ammunition?
No, I mean the same rights or ability to purchase the firearms would extend to ammunition as
But
well.
it doesn't say that they have the rights to buy the ammunition, is there?
Yeah, first of all, as Beth said, from our perspective, I have no problem. We have no problem at all with individuals owning firearms as long as they're a responsible firearms owner. One thing I didn't mention in the proposed legislation is safety training. Several states have safety training as a requirement to then receive a permit. And so, if individuals are entitled to own a firearm, I own a handgun. If they're entitled to do it and know what they're doing, then we have no problem with responsible gun owners having that right, correspondingly having the ammunition that goes along with it. So, yes, ma'am.
My question is, when you and Ryan went to Washington,
I'm sorry?
when you and Ryan went to Washington and you proposed these laws, why do you think, with all the killings and the shootings and everything that this country has done the last 2 years, why do you think that our people in Washington are not voting to change this? Is it just because the NRA is stronger?
Two words, gun lobby. Gun lobby. All right, let's come over here. Yes, sir.
My question is for Beth. You talked about going like to Kroger and having them to stop the gun thing, and I guess my question is, so it's legal to carry it, how does a business make that rule? How do they implement something like that?
Sure, that's actually something we've been, like I said, working on, especially on the small business level, because that's a lot easier because they have controls over their, specific locations, whereas a big store like Kroger would have to change on the national level. So the way that it works now is stores like that generally abide by the rules of the state. So in Indiana, you can carry anywhere. So they go by the state laws for stores like Kroger. However, any store, public or private, has the option to ask that people not bring guns into their stores. And there's two ways to do it. You can post a sign that just says, please don't bring firearms in here. That doesn't make it illegal. If someone comes in, you can ask them to leave, but you can't call the police on them just for walking in the door. However, there is ways you can post signs with legal terms on them that makes it so them entering, they are already breaking the law, and you can then call the police to ask to have them taken out. So there's different ways of doing it, depending on the signage that's posted. So IKEA, for instance, has a sign up that says, we ask that you not bring firearms into our stores. However, it's not illegal. It's just a ask. It doesn't become illegal until you ask them to leave, and if they were to refuse, then you could call the police for trespassing, essentially. So there are ways to get around that, and obviously private locations have the ability to do that. Down in Bloomington, they've been very active in posting those specific signs at a lot of places, and they've been traveling around the town there, passing that out and asking stores to put those up. And we're actually hoping here in Indianapolis with the NRA convention coming next year to start a push for asking locations here in Indianapolis to do that before the NRA convention comes, to try to keep more stores and restaurants specifically in the downtown area to post signs like that.
Jerry, could you expound on the open carry? When does that become intimidation or brandishing?
Well, it doesn't. In the absence of any other sort of conduct, they're entitled to do that under Indiana law. Yeah, I mean, if there's something threatening being said, but, Mr. Wabash.
Chicago is continuously made fun of for having such tough gun laws, but so many murders. And then you hear about how so many guns come from Indiana to Chicago. Could you describe how that works?
Yeah, and I don't know, Brian, anyone knows the exact percentage, but is referring to Chicago, which does have a relatively strict gun regulation, but something like 30 to 40% of the weapons used in crime in Chicago that are recovered actually come from Indiana, and that's because it's much easier to purchase a firearm in Indiana than in Illinois.
Okay, you said that there's 100% universal background check.
I'm sorry?
You said there's 100% universal background checks in Indiana.
No, not at all. No, virtually no background. The only requirement to do a background check is for a sale through a federally licensed dealer. If you are deemed a private dealer at the gun shows, for example, you don't have to do it. Any sale between individuals, or they're selling the AK or the ARs, there's no requirement to do a background check in Indiana. Yes, ma'am. We'll take a couple more, but I'm getting messages that we got a lot to do yet tonight. Yes.
Okay. You said of the pending homicides, there were 78 that involved firearms, and then you also said like the 1-year-old
Yes.
that was killed, that they actually legally owned those guns. So I guess my question is, could you really say like are most crimes committed with illegal guns or legal or just?
I don't have a breakdown. I would, my belief would be, and I think Ryan would agree, that the vast majority of crimes committed with guns are individuals who were not entitled to possess those firearms. I think that's a fair statement. One more, and then right here.
When the Constitution was written, the Second Amendment was talking about guns that made 1 or 2 shots. What we're looking at now with the semi-automatic large magazines they couldn't have even fathomed that. Why is it that some kind of reasonable laws can't be made without being considered against the Second Amendment?
Well, the courts have held over and over and over that reasonable restrictions on the sale, purchase, possession of firearms does not violate the Second Amendment. I mean, that is clear. That the Second Amendment is not absolute. Obviously, it's a continually evolving area of the law as states attempt to address the gun violence that we have, and then it will fall to the courts to make that determination. When going back to the last year when they wanted to eliminate the handgun permit, one of the things I said when I testified is file a lawsuit. They were claiming that violated the Second Amendment. File a lawsuit. Don't repeal the law. File a lawsuit. See if a court tells you that requiring a handgun permit violates the Second Amendment. It doesn't. But they were intent on pushing the bill through, unfortunately, because moms were there in the front line and police agencies and prosecutors. That bill was defeated last year. So, yep, okay. If Annie says take one more, you know who's in control here.
I'm going to give it to the ladies in front of me. I'll just ask my question off camera.
My question was, what is the correlation? It seems like once a month there's a sale at the state fairgrounds for guns. So what's the correlation of accessibility, with all our high rates of shootings here? I mean, it just seems like it's just outrageous.
Well, I mean, clearly there's a direct correlation between the proliferation, the term we keep using, of weapons that you saw here and the gun violence that we're experiencing. And I will repeat, what I said before. I mean, talking about the sort of things that Beth talked about or we talk about, is that going to change the whole culture and environment we live in next week? No. But the fact that we can't put all the toothpaste back in the tube, to me, doesn't mean we don't do nothing. We need to start now and push back against the just easy access to these firearms. And if we make progress next year, the year after that, then it's worth the effort.